The clock hadn't struck midnight yet when I overheard my sister tell my husband she was pregnant at our New Year party. Both of them huddled in my laundry room thinking the noise from the countdown would cover their whispers. I stood frozen behind the door holding the champagne I'd gone to grab, hearing him say, "We'll figure out how to tell her after the holidays." My hands went numb around the bottle's neck as Parker continued, his voice dripping with theatrical concern. "Maybe wait until she's in a better headspace. You know how fragile she's been since the promotion fell through." Through the crack in the door, I watched my sister Eden press herself against my husband. Her manicured fingers splayed across his chest like she owned him. She giggled, the sound I'd heard 1,000 times growing up, now curdling my stomach. "She'll be devastated, but at least the baby will have a stable father figure. God knows I picked better than she did with her career." The champagne bottle slipped slightly in my grip, but I caught it before it could crash. Instead of screaming or bursting through that door, I did something that surprised even myself. I straightened my spine, smoothed my red dress, and walked calmly back to the party wearing the brightest smile I could manufacture. In the living room, 47 guests mingled beneath silver and gold streamers, completely unaware that the host's world had just detonated. I moved through them like a ghost, refilling drinks and laughing at jokes I couldn't actually hear over the roaring in my ears. My best friend Willow caught my arm as I passed, her brow furrowed with concern. "You okay? You look pale." I squeezed her hand and lied smoothly. "Just a headache. Too much wine on an empty stomach." She bought it because I'd always been the stable one. The sister who got her MBA while Eden dropped out of community college twice. The wife who meal prepped and maintained a perfect home while working 60-hour weeks. Nobody would suspect I'd just discovered my entire life was constructed on quicksand. When Parker and Eden emerged from the laundry room 3 minutes later, carefully staggered and wearing practiced expressions of innocence, I was ready. I caught Eden's eye across the room and raised my champagne flute in a silent toast. She faltered mid-step, confusion flickering across her face before she recovered with an uncertain smile. What neither of them knew, what nobody in that room suspected, was that I'd been documenting irregularities in Parker's business accounts for 3 months. My promotion hadn't fallen through randomly. I'd turned it down deliberately to free up time for what I'd discovered. Parker's boutique investment firm was running a sophisticated Ponzi scheme, and he'd been using family money, including the trust fund my grandmother left me and Eden, to keep his fraud afloat. I'd hired a forensic accountant in October who'd traced every transaction back to its source. The USB drive in my bedroom safe contained enough evidence to send my husband to federal prison for 15 years minimum. And my sister, who'd been helping with the books for the past 6 months, she was listed as a partner on half the fraudulent accounts. They thought I was a naive wife who'd never question where our comfortable lifestyle came from. They thought I was a devoted sister who'd never check why Eden suddenly had designer handbags on a waitress salary. But I'd been a corporate auditor before my MBA, and I'd never actually stopped being one. Tonight was just the beginning of teaching them exactly who they'd underestimated. The countdown to midnight erupted around me in a cacophony of drunken enthusiasm, but I barely registered it. 60 seconds. 59. 58. Each number ticked down like a detonation sequence in my mind. Parker materialized at my side exactly as the crowd hit 30, his hand finding the small of my back with practiced ease, playing the devoted husband for our audience. His cologne, the same sandalwood scent I'd loved for 6 years, now smelled like betrayal. "There you are," he murmured against my ear, his breath warm and poisonous. "I was worried you'd disappeared." I turned into him, letting my body relax against his chest the way I always had, even as my mind cataloged every muscle in his arm, every calculation behind his concerned expression. "Just making sure everyone had champagne for the toast," I said, my voice honey-sweet and hollow. "Can't have our party be anything less than perfect." Eden wove through the crowd toward us, her emerald dress hugging curves she'd definitely enhanced since I'd last really looked at her. She was 26, 3 years younger than me, and had spent our entire lives perfecting the art of being underestimated. Pretty enough to be noticed, scattered enough to be dismissed. I'd paid for her car insurance twice when she'd forgotten to renew it. I'd co-signed her apartment lease after 3 evictions. I'd believed her when she said she needed business advice from Parker, when she started showing up at our house in workout clothes and stayed for dinner, when she volunteered to help him with paperwork during tax season. God, I'd been so fucking blind. Or maybe I'd just been too busy trying to be the responsible one to notice the wolf I'd invited into our fold. Eden caught my eye and her smile wavered, just slightly, a hairline crack in her performance. She knew something was different. She just couldn't quite identify what. The crowd reached 10 and everyone linked arms, creating a chain of champagne-soaked revelry that snaked through our modern colonial house. Parker pulled me closer, his other hand finding Eden's, creating a triangle of betrayal disguised as family unity. 9, 8, 7. Willow appeared at my other side, her loyalty as solid as the lies surrounding me were flimsy. She'd been suspicious of Parker for months, dropping hints I'd been too devoted to hear, asking questions about our finances I'd been too trusting to investigate. Until I'd spent 3 months of lunch breaks and late nights unraveling the financial empire my husband had built on fraud and my grandmother's money. 6, 5, 4. I looked at Parker's profile. This man I'd married in a ceremony that cost $40,000, most of it funded by the very trust fund he was embezzling from. He'd promised me forever, 2 kids, and a house in the suburbs with a golden retriever. He'd delivered secrets, theft, and apparently a baby with my sister. 3, 2, 1. The room exploded with noise, confetti raining down like toxic snow as everyone screamed and kissed and celebrated a year they had no idea was about to become their worst nightmare. Parker turned to kiss me, and I let him, tasting lies on his lips while calculating exactly how many counts of wire fraud the federal prosecutor would charge him with. When he pulled back, I saw it. The flash of guilt quickly replaced by arrogance, the certainty that he'd gotten away with everything because I was too naive to notice, too devoted to question, too in love to audit. Eden hugged me next, her perfume cloying and familiar, the same scent she'd worn since high school when she'd copied everything I did, wanting everything I had. Now she had my husband and a baby growing in her belly. What she didn't know was that she'd signed her name on 14 fraudulent investment accounts, making her equally culpable in eyes of the law, and that every text message between them discussing the money had been automatically backed up to the cloud storage I controlled. I hugged her back with genuine warmth, feeling her stiffen slightly in surprise. "Happy New Year, little sister," I whispered against her ear. "This is going to be a year neither of us will ever forget." She pulled back, studying my face with an uncertainty that almost made me laugh. Almost. Instead, I turned to the room and raised my champagne glass high. The crowd quieted, everyone turning toward me with flushed faces and sloppy grins, expecting the traditional toast I gave every year about gratitude and new beginnings. "To family," I said, my voice carrying clearly over the dying celebration. "To the people who show their true faces when they think nobody's watching." Parker's hand tightened on my waist. Eden's smile froze into a rictus of uncertainty. But I wasn't done. "To secrets that come to light." I locked eyes with my husband, letting him see something dark and knowing flicker in my expression. "And to consequences that arrive exactly when they're earned." The room erupted in confused cheers, nobody understanding the threat woven through my words except the 2 people who needed to hear it. I drained my champagne in one long swallow while maintaining eye contact with Parker, watching his face cycle through confusion, suspicion, and the first whisper of fear. He knew me well enough to recognize when I was serious. He just didn't know yet how serious or how thoroughly I'd documented his crimes, or that the FBI had been copied on every piece of evidence my forensic accountant had compiled. The party continued around us in oblivious celebration, but in our little triangle of betrayal, the temperature had dropped to Arctic levels. Eden excused herself first, mumbling something about the bathroom, her champagne glass trembling slightly in her grip. I watched her retreat, marking the way her hand instinctively moved to her still flat stomach, protecting the baby she'd made with my husband while sleeping in my guest room and raiding my refrigerator. Parker leaned down, his lips brushing my ear in what would look like affection to anyone watching. "What was that about?" His voice carried an edge I'd never heard before, sharp and dangerous. I turned into him, letting my lips curve into a smile that didn't reach my eyes. just thinking about how everything changes in a year. Who would have guessed last New Year's what this one would bring? His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Sienna. We should get back to hosting, I interrupted smoothly, extracting myself from his grip with practiced ease. Our guests need us. Both of us. Together. I emphasized the last word, letting it hang between us like a noose. He wanted to press. I could see it in the tension of his shoulders, but Willow was already approaching with two of his business partners in tow, men whose retirement accounts he'd been systematically draining for 18 months. Men whose trust he'd cultivated and exploited. Men whose cooperation with federal investigators would be absolutely guaranteed once they learned the truth. I spent the next hour playing perfect hostess, while my mind cataloged every detail for the FBI report I'd be filing in 72 hours, the exact amount of time my lawyer had advised waiting after the holidays to ensure the investigation couldn't be accused of vindictive timing. Eden emerged from the bathroom with freshly applied makeup but couldn't quite mask the panic in her eyes. She avoided me for the rest of the party, sticking close to Parker whenever possible, their body language screaming conspiracy to anyone actually paying attention. Nobody was, except Willow and me. At 2 a.m., the last guests finally stumbled out into the snow, drunk and happy, and completely unaware they'd just witnessed the beginning of the end. Parker locked the front door and turned to face me, his expression carefully neutral but his eyes searching mine for answers I wasn't ready to give. Long night, he said, loosening his tie with fingers that trembled almost imperceptibly. Want to talk about whatever's bothering you? I moved through our living room collecting glasses and plates, keeping my hands busy and my face turned away. Nothing's bothering me. Why would you think that? That toast, the way you've been looking at me all night. Something's different. He followed me into the kitchen, crowding my space in a way that used to feel protective, but now felt predatory. I set the glasses in the sink carefully, buying time before turning to face him with an expression of mild confusion. I think you've had too much to drink, Parker. You're imagining things. It was a masterclass in gaslighting, using his own favorite weapon against him, and I watched him falter under the assault. He'd spent years making me question my instincts, my observations, my reality. Now I was returning the favor, and the uncertainty in his eyes was almost worth the pain of what I'd discovered. Maybe you're right, he conceded finally, but his gaze remained suspicious. I'm going to bed. Don't stay up too late cleaning. He kissed my forehead, a gesture I'd once found comforting that now made my skin crawl, and disappeared upstairs. I waited until I heard our bedroom door close before pulling out my phone and texting Willow. He knows something's off, but not what. Eden's terrified. This is going to be easier than I thought. Her response came immediately. You sure about the timing? Once this starts, there's no going back. I looked around our kitchen, this space where I'd cooked countless meals and hosted endless dinners and built what I thought was a life. Every marble countertop, every custom cabinet, every piece of this perfect house had been purchased with stolen money. My grandmother's money, the retirement funds of Parker's clients, the trust of people who'd believed in him. I've never been more sure of anything, I typed back. They wanted to wait until after the holidays to tell me? Fine. I'll wait until after the holidays to destroy them both. The morning of January 2nd arrived with the kind of crystalline winter sunlight that made everything look deceptively clean. I woke before Parker, slipping out of bed at 5:30 to avoid the awkwardness of morning intimacy with a man I could barely stand to look at. The coffee maker gurgled to life as I stood at our kitchen window, watching ice crystals form patterns on the glass while mentally reviewing the timeline I'd constructed with my lawyer. 72 hours from New Year's Eve meant I'd be walking into the FBI field office on January 3rd at 9 a.m. to hand over evidence that would dismantle everything Parker had built. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, I felt nothing but cold, crystalline clarity. Parker appeared at 6:45, already dressed in one of his custom suits, projecting the image of successful entrepreneur he'd cultivated so carefully. He poured coffee and stood too close, studying my face with an intensity that would have unnerved me a week ago. Now I just returned his gaze steadily, letting him search for answers he wouldn't find. You seem different, he said finally, more relaxed, less stressed about work. I added cream to my coffee with deliberate slowness. I've been thinking about your advice. Maybe I was too focused on climbing the corporate ladder. Maybe it's time to reevaluate priorities. His expression shifted to something resembling relief, and I realized he thought I was settling, becoming more malleable, easier to control. Men like Parker never saw strength in stillness, only submission. "That's mature of you," he said, his voice warming with approval. "I've always said you work too hard. We have enough money. You should focus on other things." Other things like being the oblivious wife while he stole from clients and impregnated my sister. Other things like not noticing when accounts drained and paperwork disappeared and business trips multiplied. My phone buzzed with a text from Eden. "Can we talk? I feel weird about New Year's. Like you know something?" I showed the screen to Parker casually. "Your girlfriend's feeling guilty." The words came out before I could stop them, sharp and cold in the morning quiet. Parker's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. "What did you just say?" I held his gaze for 3 long seconds, watching calculations race behind his eyes before I laughed. Light and dismissive, as if I'd made a joke in poor taste. "Relax. I meant your friend. Eden's been acting strange lately, that's all. Probably dating someone she's embarrassed about." The tension in his shoulders released fractionally, but his eyes remained wary. He'd almost revealed himself, almost confirmed what I already knew. Good. Let him be uncertain. Let him spend the next 2 days wondering if I knew, questioning every interaction, dissecting every word. It would make the federal agents at his door that much more devastating. I spent that morning at the gym, running on the treadmill until my legs burned and my mind cleared into sharp focus. Willow met me for lunch at a bistro downtown, sliding into the booth with an expression of barely contained anxiety. "You're really doing this," she said without preamble. "Full scorched earth." I broke apart a breadstick methodically. They took my grandmother's money, the trust fund she spent her whole life building so Eden and I would be secure. Parker stole it and Eden helped him. They deserve everything that's coming. Willow leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. The pregnancy, though. That baby didn't do anything wrong. The breadstick crumbled between my fingers. That baby will be born to a mother in federal prison and a father serving 15 years minimum. Maybe that's tragic. Maybe that's justice. I don't really care which. My best friend studied me with something between admiration and fear. You've changed. Since you found out, you've become someone else. I met her eyes steadily. No. I've just stopped pretending to be the person everyone wanted me to be. The devoted wife, the responsible sister, the woman who fixes everyone's problems while her own life collapses. That person was a performance, and I'm done performing. Willow reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Then I'm with you. Whatever you need. What I needed was to survive 2 more days of pretending everything was normal, while the evidence I'd compiled worked its way through proper channels. My lawyer had assured me the FBI would move quickly once they reviewed the documentation. Wire fraud across state lines involving amounts exceeding $2 million. Forged signatures on investment documents. Fake companies created to funnel money through offshore accounts. The kind of systematic financial crime that made federal prosecutors salivate. That evening, Parker came home early with flowers, a gesture he hadn't made in 8 months. Yellow roses, my supposed favorite, though he'd never bothered to remember I actually preferred peonies. "I've been thinking," he said, arranging them in a vase with uncharacteristic attention. "Maybe we should take a vacation, get away for a while, reconnect." I accepted the flowers with a smile that felt like shattered glass. "That sounds lovely. When were you thinking?" "Maybe February, somewhere warm, the Caribbean." He watched my reaction carefully, and I understood immediately. He wanted to be out of the country, away from potential investigation, establishing alibis and distance. Eden must have told him about my strange behavior at New Year's, and now he was preparing escape routes. Too late. The forensic accountant had already flagged his accounts with the appropriate authorities. Any attempt to transfer large sums or flee would trigger immediate intervention. February sounds perfect, I agreed easily. I'll start looking at resorts. The relief in his expression was almost comical. He thought he'd successfully distracted me, redirected my attention toward vacation planning and wifely duties. He had no idea I'd already given the FBI his passport number and travel history, that every credit card and bank account he controlled was being quietly monitored, that the walls were closing in with bureaucratic inevitability. My phone rang as we were finishing dinner. Eden's name flashed on the screen, and Parker's fork paused midway to his mouth. I answered on speaker, my voice light and unconcerned. "Hey, what's up?" "Can I come over? I really need to talk to you about something." Eden's voice carried a tremor I'd never heard before. Genuine fear. Parker shook his head frantically, mouthing no across the table. But I smiled at him and said, "Of course, come now, we'll have wine and catch up." The moment I hung up, Parker erupted. "What are you doing? We can't have her here tonight." "Why not? She's my sister, and you've been encouraging me to spend more time with family." I tilted my head, watching him scramble for excuses that wouldn't reveal the truth. "I just meant, I'm tired. I thought we'd have a quiet evening." "Then go to bed. Eden and I can have sister time without you." I collected the dinner plates with deliberate calm. "Unless there's some reason you don't want her here that you're not telling me." The trap was perfect. Either he admitted to wanting to avoid my sister for suspicious reasons, or he shut up and let her come. His jaw worked silently for a moment before he forced a smile. "Of course not. I'll just head upstairs and let you two catch up." Eden arrived 30 minutes later, wearing anxiety like a second skin. She'd dressed carefully, I noticed, in an oversized sweater that concealed her stomach. Though at barely 6 weeks pregnant, there was nothing to hide yet. I poured wine for myself and sparkling water for her, a detail she didn't question, but Parker would have noticed immediately if he'd been in the room. "You've seemed off since New Year's," Eden said without preamble, perched on the edge of my sofa like she might need to bolt. "That toast you made. The way you were looking at me and Parker. It felt like you knew something." I sipped my wine slowly, letting silence stretch between us until she started to fidget. "Knew what, Eden? What could I possibly know that would make you this nervous?" Her hands twisted in her lap. "Nothing. We're sisters. I can tell when something's bothering you. You want to know what's bothering me?" I set my wine glass down with deliberate precision. "I'm bothered by the fact that my little sister has been lying to me for months. That she's been in my house, eating my food, pretending to care about me while betraying me in ways I didn't think were possible." The color drained from Eden's face. "Sienna, I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" I leaned forward, dropping all pretense of sisterly affection. "Because I think you know exactly what I'm talking about. I think you've been carrying around guilt that's eating you alive, and part of you wants to confess, just to make it stop." She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against hardwood. "I should go. You're acting crazy." "Sit down." The command in my voice surprised us both. Eden froze halfway to the door, something in my tone bypassing her defenses and triggering instinctive obedience. I said, "Sit down. We're not done talking." She returned to the sofa slowly, moving like someone approaching a dangerous animal. Good. She should be scared. She should understand that the sister she'd manipulated and betrayed was gone, replaced by someone who'd learned to calculate consequences with mathematical precision. "I know about the baby," I said quietly. "I heard you tell Parker on New Year's Eve. I was standing outside the laundry room with champagne while you two planned how to break the news after the holidays." Eden's face crumpled instantly, tears spilling down her cheeks in a performance she'd perfected over 26 years. The crying that had gotten her out of trouble in school, that had made our parents forgive every transgression, that had convinced me to bail her out repeatedly. But I'd evolved beyond being moved by her tears. "How long?" I asked clinically. "How long have you been sleeping with my husband?" 6 months, she whispered through sobs. "It just happened." "We didn't mean for it to. You were always so busy with work, and Parker was lonely, and I was there, and one thing led to another." I let her words hang in the air, this pathetic justification for destroying her sister's marriage. "And the trust fund? The one Grandma left us? Did helping Parker steal from that just happen too?" Eden's head snapped up, genuine shock replacing her calculated tears. "What? I didn't. Parker said those were legitimate investment accounts. He said we were helping you diversify. He lied. Every account you signed, every document you witnessed, every transfer you processed was part of a Ponzi scheme. Parker's been stealing from his clients for 2 years, and he used our family money to keep the fraud going. You're not just an affair partner, Eden. You're an accessory to wire fraud. The implications hit her in waves, each one visibly weakening her composure. No, Parker wouldn't. He said he was helping families build wealth. He said whatever he needed to say to manipulate you, just like he manipulated me. Just like he manipulated every client whose retirement fund he drained. I stood, looking down at my sister with something between pity and contempt. Tomorrow morning, I'm meeting with federal investigators. I'm giving them 18 months of documentation proving systematic fraud. They'll arrest Parker probably within 48 hours. And you, little sister, are going down with him. Eden's sobs turned to hyperventilation, her hands clutching her stomach protectively. I'm pregnant. They can't send me to prison. What about the baby? What about my life? I countered coldly. What about my grandmother's legacy? What about the families you both helped destroy? You made your choices, Eden. You chose to sleep with my husband. You chose to sign documents without reading them. You chose to believe comfortable lies instead of asking hard questions. Now you get to live with the consequences. She lunged forward, grabbing my hands with desperate strength. Please, I'll do anything. I'll leave town. I'll sign over everything. Just don't turn me in. Please, Lauren, I'm your sister. I extracted my hands from her grip with deliberate gentleness. You stopped being my sister when you decided my husband was more important than our relationship. Now you're just another criminal who got caught. Eden fled into the night, her sobs echoing back through our open door. I closed it quietly and turned to find Parker standing at the top of the stairs, his face ashen in the dim light. You really are going to destroy us, he said, descending slowly. Everything we built together. I laughed, the sound harsh and brittle in the empty house. Everything you built on lies and theft. I didn't build this, Parker. I was just the convenient facade that made your fraud seem legitimate. The respectable wife with the MBA who made you look trustworthy. He reached the bottom of the stairs, and for the first time since I'd known him, Parker looked genuinely afraid. If you do this, you'll have nothing. The house, the cars, our lifestyle, it all goes away. You'll be starting over from zero. Better than staying at negative infinity married to a con artist, I replied evenly. Besides, I've already secured what matters. The investigators know I've been cooperating. My grandmother's trust fund, what's left of it, will be returned to me once the asset forfeiture is complete. And I've got job offers from 3 firms who are impressed by the forensic work I did uncovering your fraud. His expression shifted through denial, anger, bargaining, and finally settled on a cold rage I'd never seen before. You think you're so smart, but you don't know everything. There are things hidden you'll never find. Offshore accounts you can't trace. I've been preparing for this possibility for months. You mean the accounts in the Cayman Islands under your mother's maiden name, or the ones in Switzerland using your college roommate's information? I found those in November, Parker. The forensic accountant traced every dollar you tried to hide. There's nothing left you can use to run. The confidence drained from his face like water through a sieve. Impossible. Those accounts are buried under 4 layers of shell companies. 5 layers, actually, but not buried deep enough. Not from someone who knows how to read financial statements and has access to international banking databases through legitimate channels. Parker's hand shot out, gripping my upper arm with enough force to bruise. You vindictive bitch. I should have known you'd pull something like this. You've always been cold, calculating. I thought if I found warmth elsewhere. If you finish that sentence, if you try to justify what you did by blaming me, I'll add assault to the charges I'm filing against you. My voice dropped to a whisper, but every word carried the weight of absolute certainty. Let go of my arm, Parker. Step back. And understand that every move you make from this point forward will be documented and reported. You're already finished. The only question is how much worse you want to make it for yourself. His fingers released slowly, and he stepped back, something in him finally breaking. What happens now? Now you pack a bag and leave. I want you out of this house tonight. You can stay in a hotel or with your mother or in your car. I don't care. But you're not sleeping under the same roof as me ever again. Parker climbed the stairs like a man walking to execution, and I listened to him moving around our bedroom, opening drawers and closets, packing the life he'd thought was secure. When he came down 30 minutes later with a suitcase and garment bag, he paused at the door. I did love you once, before it all got complicated. No, you didn't, I replied calmly. You loved what I represented, the legitimacy, the respectability, the cover story for your crimes. But you never loved me, Parker. If you had, you wouldn't have stolen from my grandmother. You wouldn't have fucked my sister. You would have been honest about who you really were instead of making me fall in love with a performance. He left without another word, and I locked the door behind him with hands that didn't shake. Upstairs, I opened my laptop and reviewed the file one last time. 347 pages of documentation, bank statements, forged signatures, email correspondence, wire transfer receipts, client testimonies I'd collected by reaching out to people who'd complained about account irregularities. It was all there, comprehensive and damning and absolutely airtight. Tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., I would walk into the FBI field office and hand over evidence that would send my husband to prison. My sister would likely face charges as an accessory, though her pregnancy might earn sympathy from a jury, or it might make her seem even more callous for committing crimes while expecting a child. Either way, their lives as they knew them were ending. And mine was just beginning. I pulled out my phone and texted Willow. It's done. Parker's gone. Eden knows. Tomorrow we burn it all down. Her response came immediately. I'm proud of you. You're terrifying, but I'm proud. I smiled at the screen, feeling something close to peace for the first time in 3 months. Terrifying was good. Terrifying meant I'd never be underestimated again. Terrifying meant the next person who tried to betray me would think twice. Terrifying meant I'd learned the most important lesson life had to offer. Trust was earned, not given, and consequences were inevitable. The FBI field office smelled like industrial coffee and bureaucratic efficiency, all fluorescent lighting and government-issue furniture that had seen better decades. I sat in an interview room at 9:15 on January 3rd, my leather portfolio containing 18 months of evidence resting on the table between me and Special Agent Marcus Hayes, a man whose silver hair and weathered face suggested he'd seen every variation of financial fraud humanity could devise. His partner, Agent Cooper, sat beside him with a laptop open, ready to document everything I said. Mrs. Walsh, thank you for coming in, Hayes began, his voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone trained not to make promises. You indicated on your initial contact form that you have evidence of systematic fraud involving your husband's investment firm? I opened the portfolio with deliberate precision, extracting the USB drive that contained digital copies of everything I'd compiled. My husband Parker Walsh operates Horizon Capital Management. For the past 24 months, he's been running a Ponzi scheme that's defrauded approximately 47 clients of roughly $2.3 million. I have documentation of every transaction, communication, and fabricated investment report. Agent Cooper's fingers paused over her keyboard. And you're certain of these numbers? I'm a former corporate auditor with an MBA in forensic accounting. I've traced every dollar, cross-referenced every claim, and interviewed 12 clients who've complained about account irregularities. The numbers are conservative, if anything. I slid a printed summary across the table. He also embezzled funds from a family trust, my grandmother's estate that was split between my sister and myself. Approximately $400,000 from my portion, $300,000 from my sister's. Hayes studied the summary with the intensity of a man who'd learned not to get excited until evidence proved legitimate. This is extensive work. When did you first become suspicious? October of last year. Parker started getting nervous phone calls he'd take in another room. Our financial statements showed larger deposits than his claimed commissions should have generated. When I asked about it, he had practiced answers that felt rehearsed. I paused, deciding how much personal detail to include. Then I noticed my sister was spending time at our house when I was at work. She'd been helping with paperwork at Parker's office. The pieces started forming a pattern I couldn't ignore. Agent Cooper looked up from her laptop. Your sister is involved? Eden Morgan. She's been signing documents as a witness and processing transfers as his administrative assistant for 6 months. Whether she knew it was fraud is debatable, but she's legally implicated. Hayes leaned back, his expression calculating. You understand that if we proceed with this investigation, your entire financial life will be scrutinized, your assets frozen, your marriage will effectively be over? My marriage ended when my husband decided to steal from my family and sleep with my sister. I'm not here to save our relationship. I'm here to make sure he faces consequences for destroying other people's lives. The words came out colder than I'd intended, but neither agent flinched. They'd probably heard worse. Hayes pulled out a legal pad and clicked his pen with an air of inevitability. Walk me through how the scheme operates. Start from the beginning. For the next 3 hours, I detailed Parker's methodology with the precision of a prosecutor building a case, because that's essentially what I'd been doing. He'd target middle-class clients approaching retirement, people with some savings but not sophisticated enough to scrutinize investment statements closely. He'd promise conservative growth, 8 to 10% annually, while actually placing their money in high-risk investments or simply parking it in operating accounts. When clients wanted to withdraw funds, Parker would use newer clients' deposits to cover the redemptions, the classic Ponzi structure that eventually collapses when redemptions exceed new capital. He kept 2 sets of books, I explained, pulling up documents on Agent Cooper's laptop from the USB drive. Legitimate statements for the regulatory filings, fabricated statements for clients showing the growth he'd promised. The fabrication became systematic about 14 months ago when several large accounts matured and clients expected returns. Agent Hayes studied a side-by-side comparison of real versus fake statements, his jaw tightening. And your grandmother's trust fund? Transferred in small increments to avoid triggering bank reporting requirements. 10,000 here, 15,000 there. Over 18 months, he drained almost all of it, used it to cover shortfalls when his high-risk investments failed. Agent Cooper flagged several documents with digital markers. These bank records show your sister's name on multiple accounts. She had signing authority? Parker added her gradually. Started with helping with paperwork, then gave her access to process transfers. Finally made her an authorized signer on 4 operating accounts. She's listed as administrative partner on company documents filed 6 months ago. I met Hayes's eyes steadily. I'm not trying to protect her. She made choices that implicated her legally, but I also don't think she understood the full scope of what she was participating in until recently. Hayes made a note on his legal pad. When did you become aware of the affair between your husband and sister? The question hit harder than I'd expected, even though I'd known it was coming. New Year's Eve. I overheard them in my laundry room discussing her pregnancy. The agents exchanged glances, some unspoken communication passing between them. That adds a layer of complexity, Cooper said carefully. Juries tend to have strong reactions to cases involving infidelity and pregnancy. Defense attorneys will use it to suggest vindictive motivation. My motivation is justice for the families he defrauded, not revenge for infidelity, I replied evenly. The affair just provided clarity about his character. If he could betray me that completely, defrauding clients was probably easy. Hayes closed his legal pad with an air of decision. Mrs. Walsh, based on what you've provided, we have enough to open a formal investigation. This will take time, several months minimum. We'll need to verify everything, interview clients, examine original documents. The process will be invasive for you as well. I understand. I've already moved money from joint accounts into my own name. I've consulted with a divorce attorney. I'm prepared for this to get ugly. Agent Cooper's expression softened fractionally. You should know that we see a lot of spouses who discover fraud. Most struggle with the decision to cooperate with prosecution. The fact that you've documented everything this thoroughly, that you're here voluntarily, it speaks to integrity that's rare in these cases. Her words unexpectedly stung my eyes with tears I'd thought I'd exhausted. Parker betrayed everyone who trusted him. If I stayed silent, I'd be complicit. My grandmother worked her entire life to leave something for her granddaughters. He stole that legacy and used it to fund his lies. That's unforgivable. Hayes stood, extending his hand across the table. We'll be in touch within 48 hours. Don't discuss this investigation with anyone, including your husband or sister. If they contact you, document everything but don't reveal what you've told us. Can you do that?" I shook his hand firmly. "I've been documenting everything for 3 months. I'm not stopping now." The January sunlight felt harsh and clinical when I emerged from the FBI building, like the fluorescent lighting had followed me outside. My phone showed 7 missed calls from Parker and 3 from Eden, none of which I had any intention of returning. Instead, I called Willow from my car, my hands trembling slightly as adrenaline finally caught up with me. "It's done," I said when she answered. "They're opening a formal investigation. They said they have enough to proceed." Willow's exhale was audible. "How do you feel?" "Terrified, relieved, powerful, all of it at once." I started the car, needing motion to process the enormity of what I'd just set in motion. There's no going back now. I spent the rest of that day at Willow's apartment, deliberately avoiding my house and the memories it contained. We ordered takeout and watched mindless television, her presence a steady anchor while my mind spun through scenarios and consequences. Around 7 p.m., my phone rang with an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Sienna, it's your mother." The formal tone told me everything I needed to know before she continued. "Eden called me hysterical. She says you're accusing her and Parker of terrible things, that you've threatened to go to the police. What's going on?" I'd been preparing for this conversation since Eden fled my house, but it still made my stomach clench. "Mom, I can't discuss details of an ongoing investigation. But yes, I've reported Parker to federal authorities. Eden is implicated because she signed documents and processed transactions as his business partner." My mother's gasp was audible. "Investigation? Federal authorities? Lauren, this is your family. Whatever problems you're having with Parker, you don't destroy your sister's life over a marital dispute. This isn't about the affair, though that's certainly part of it. This is about systematic fraud that's cost families their life savings. Eden helped him, whether she knew the full scope or not. She's legally responsible for her actions." "She's pregnant!" My mother's voice rose to something close to a shriek. "She's carrying your niece or nephew and you're going to send her to prison? What kind of monster have you become?" The word monster echoed in my skull, but I kept my voice level. The kind who won't let criminals hide behind family loyalty. "Parker stole Grandma's money, Mom. The trust fund she left Eden and me. He drained almost all of it to cover his fraud. If you're looking for a monster, maybe ask your younger daughter how she could betray her own grandmother's legacy." Silence stretched across the line, broken only by my mother's ragged breathing. "I don't believe you. Parker has always been so successful, so generous. He wouldn't need to steal. Then you don't know him at all. Or you've chosen not to see what was obvious to anyone paying attention." I stood, pacing Willow's living room with growing agitation. "I have evidence, Mom. 18 months' worth. Bank statements, forged documents, client testimonies. The FBI wouldn't be investigating if this was just family drama." My mother's voice dropped to something cold and final. "If you go through with this, if you destroy your sister's life and that baby's future, don't expect forgiveness. Don't expect to be welcome at family gatherings. You're choosing strangers over your own blood. I'm choosing justice over enabling criminals. If that makes me unwelcome, then I'll build my own family with people who have actual integrity." I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking with anger and grief. Willow appeared at my elbow with a glass of wine. "Your mother chose sides." She chose the easy answer. The comfortable lie that lets her avoid seeing her daughter as a criminal and her son-in-law as a con artist. I drained half the wine in one swallow. They'll all turn against me. My parents, extended family, probably half our friends. Parker and Eden will paint me as vindictive and unstable, and people will believe them because it's easier than accepting the truth. Willow's arm came around my shoulders. "Then we'll make sure the truth is so thoroughly documented that belief becomes irrelevant. The FBI has your evidence. They'll verify every claim. Parker and Eden will face consequences regardless of what your family thinks." That night, I slept fitfully on Willow's couch, My dreams filled with courtrooms and betrayal and my grandmother's disappointed face. When my phone rang at 6 a.m., I answered it groggily to find Agent Hayes' voice on the line. "Mrs. Walsh, I need you to come back to the office this morning. We've been reviewing your documentation overnight, and we have questions." My stomach dropped. Questions about the validity of the evidence? Questions about additional crimes we've uncovered in your materials. "Can you be here by 9? I confirmed and hung up, my mind racing. What had they found that I'd missed? For the next 2 hours, I reviewed my own evidence on my laptop, trying to identify what might have caught federal attention beyond the obvious fraud. Agent Hayes met me in the same interview room, but this time he was accompanied by 2 additional agents and an assistant U.S. attorney named Jennifer Marks, a woman with sharp eyes and sharper suits who radiated prosecutorial intensity. "Mrs. Walsh, thank you for coming in on short notice," Marks began, sliding a stack of documents across the table. "Your evidence has revealed something beyond standard Ponzi scheme fraud. Your husband has been using his investment firm to launder money for several clients engaged in drug trafficking." The room tilted slightly as I processed this information. Drug trafficking? That can't be right. His clients are retirees and middle-class families. Agent Cooper pulled up documents on her laptop, rotating it to show me a series of wire transfers I'd documented but not fully understood. These transactions, the ones you flagged as suspicious because they were larger than normal and came from business accounts rather than individuals, they originate from shell companies we've been investigating for 18 months. Hayes leaned forward, his expression grave. "Your husband was taking dirty money from drug operations, running it through fake investment accounts to make it appear legitimate, then returning it minus his commission. The Ponzi scheme was almost secondary, a way to generate operating capital while the real business was money laundering." I stared at the documents, seeing patterns I'd identified but not understood. I thought those were just unusual business clients. Parker said he was diversifying into corporate accounts. "He was diversifying into criminal enterprise," Mark said bluntly. "And whether your sister knew about this aspect is irrelevant. She processed those transfers. She signed documents authorizing those accounts. She's implicated in money laundering for drug trafficking organizations." The implications crashed over me like freezing water. This wasn't just fraud anymore. This was organized crime. Federal sentencing guidelines for money laundering carried decades, not years. Parker wasn't facing a comfortable minimum security facility. He was looking at serious prison time in facilities housing violent offenders. "What does this mean for the investigation timeline?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "It accelerates everything," Hayes replied. "Money laundering for drug trafficking gets prioritized. We can't risk your husband fleeing or destroying evidence. We'll be executing search warrants tomorrow morning." Tomorrow. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. "On his office and your home," Marks added. "We'll need you to vacate the premises by 8 a.m. You can collect essential personal items, but everything else will be secured as potential evidence." I nodded numbly, trying to process the reality that federal agents would be cataloging my entire life, that every possession Parker and I had acquired together would be scrutinized for connections to criminal activity. "There's one more thing," Agent Cooper said carefully. "We've been monitoring your husband's communications since you first contacted us. He's made several calls to associates discussing moving assets offshore. He knows something is coming." My chest tightened. Eden told him I was going to the FBI. I confronted her 2 nights ago. "Which means we need to move faster than originally planned," Hayes said. "Tomorrow morning at 6 a.m., we'll arrest your husband at his office. We'll simultaneously serve warrants on your home and Eden's apartment. This is happening, Mrs. Walsh. Are you prepared?" Was I prepared to watch federal agents arrest the man I'd loved? To see my sister taken into custody, pregnant and terrified? To have my entire life dissected for evidence of crimes I'd spent months exposing? "Yes," I said, the word emerging with a certainty I didn't feel. "I'm prepared." Mark stood, extending her hand with a firmness that felt like approval. "You've done good work here. A lot of spouses in your position would have looked the other way, accepted the lifestyle that fraud provided. You chose accountability. That takes courage most people don't have." Her words should have felt validating. Instead, they just made me tired, the weight of everything I'd set in motion settling across my shoulders like concrete. I drove home through afternoon traffic, knowing it was the last time I'd enter this house as its owner. By tomorrow evening, it would be cordoned off with crime scene tape, every room photographed and inventoried, every piece of furniture tagged as potential evidence. The house felt alien when I entered, like I was already a ghost haunting my former life. I packed methodically: clothing, toiletries, my laptop, documents related to my own finances. Everything else would stay, frozen in time, waiting for federal agents to decide what was evidence and what was simply the detritus of a failed marriage. My phone buzzed with a text from Parker. "Where are you? We need to talk. Eden says you've lost your mind." I ignored it, continuing to pack with robotic efficiency. Another text. "I know you're angry about the affair, but destroying everything isn't the answer. We can work through this." The delusion in his words was almost impressive. He still thought this was about infidelity, about hurt feelings and marital discord. He had no idea that federal agents were planning his arrest in less than 12 hours, that every communication he sent was being monitored, that his world was collapsing with bureaucratic inevitability. A final text. "If you go through with whatever you're planning, you'll regret it. I have resources you don't know about. People who will make sure you suffer for this betrayal." I screenshot the text and forwarded it to Agent Hayes with a simple message: threatening communication from subject, documenting as instructed. His response came within minutes. Noted and added to case file. Do not respond. Avoid all contact until arrest is complete. I finished packing as darkness fell, loading my car with the essentials of a life I'd spent 6 years building. The house stood silent behind me as I drove away, and I didn't look back. Not because I was strong, but because I knew if I looked back, I might see the woman I used to be, the one who believed in fairy tales and family loyalty and the fundamental goodness of people she loved. That woman had died in a laundry room on New Year's Eve, listening to her sister announce a pregnancy that shattered everything. What emerged from those ruins was harder, sharper, someone who understood that justice wasn't optional and consequences weren't negotiable. Willow met me at her apartment with practical efficiency, helping me carry bags upstairs and setting up the guest room that would be my home for the foreseeable future. "Tomorrow changes everything," she said, pouring wine neither of us would drink but needed as ritual. "No going back after federal arrests." "There was no going back after I heard them in that laundry room," I replied. "Everything since then has just been following through on decisions already made." We sat in her living room until midnight, not talking much, just existing in the space between my old life and whatever came next. My phone showed 17 missed calls from Parker, 9 from Eden, and 3 from my mother. None of them understanding that silence wasn't indecision. It was finality. At 5:30 a.m., I woke to a text from Agent Hayes. "Teams in position. Warrants executing at 06 Thalo. Stay away from office and residence. Will contact when subject is in custody." I showered and dressed with mechanical precision, each movement deliberate and disconnected from emotion. Willow made coffee we didn't drink and toast we didn't eat, both of us watching the clock count down to 6 a.m. At 6:03, my phone rang. "Subject in custody," Hayes said without preamble. No resistance. Eden Morgan also apprehended at her apartment, both en route to federal holding for arraignment. I sat down hard on Willow's couch, my legs suddenly unable to support my weight. What happens now? Now the legal process begins. They'll be arraigned this afternoon, charges formally filed. Given the severity, money laundering, wire fraud, conspiracy, bail will be substantial if granted at all. His voice gentled fractionally. "Mrs. Walsh, you did the right thing. I know that doesn't make it easier, but I wanted you to know." The federal courthouse loomed against an overcast sky, its brutalist architecture somehow perfect for the proceedings that would unfold inside. I sat in the public gallery of the arraignment hearing at 2 p.m., positioned where Parker and Eden would see me the moment they entered. Willow sat beside me, her presence a silent statement of loyalty that felt like armor. The bailiff announced the case, United States versus Parker Walsh and Eden Morgan, and they were led in wearing orange jumpsuits and restraints, their faces pale and shocked in the harsh courtroom lighting. Parker saw me first, and the hatred that flashed across his face was so pure it was almost beautiful in its honesty. No more pretense. No more manipulation. Just raw fury at the woman who'd destroyed his carefully constructed empire. Eden's reaction was different. Pure devastation, her eyes searching mine for some hint of mercy or sisterhood that she wouldn't find. Her hand moved instinctively to her stomach, protecting the baby even as her future collapsed around her. Judge Catherine Morrison presided with the severe competence of someone who'd seen every variation of criminal behavior humanity could produce. She reviewed the charges with methodical precision: conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, operating a Ponzi scheme, identity theft for fake company registrations. The list went on for several minutes, each count carrying potential years of federal prison time. Parker's attorney, an expensive defense lawyer named Richard Caldwell, who probably cost $500 an hour, stood to address bail. "Your Honor, my client is a respected businessman with deep ties to this community. He has no criminal history and poses no flight risk." Assistant U.S. Attorney Marks rose with the predatory grace of someone who'd been waiting for this moment. "Your Honor, the government strongly opposes bail. Mr. Walsh has demonstrated sophisticated financial knowledge that would allow him to access hidden assets and flee. We have evidence of offshore accounts and communications indicating intent to leave the country. He poses substantial flight risk." She pulled up documents on a screen visible to the judge. Additionally, Mr. Walsh sent threatening communications to a witness, his wife, less than 24 hours ago. "I have resources you don't know about. People who will make sure you suffer for this betrayal." This suggests both access to resources and willingness to obstruct justice. Judge Morrison studied the documents with an expression that gave nothing away. "Mr. Caldwell, does your client wish to address the threatening communication?" Parker stood, his orange jumpsuit somehow making him look smaller than I'd ever seen him. "Your Honor, that was taken out of context. I was upset about my wife's affair allegations and spoke without thinking. I would never actually harm anyone." The lie was so smooth, so practiced, that I almost admired his commitment to deception even in the face of overwhelming evidence. Almost. Judge Morrison's expression hardened fractionally. "Mr. Walsh, I'm reviewing evidence of systematic fraud spanning 24 months, money laundering for drug trafficking organizations, and threatening communications to a cooperating witness. Your assertion that you spoke without thinking does not inspire confidence." She turned to Eden's public defender, a tired-looking woman named Sarah Cooper. "Ms. Morgan, do you wish to make a statement?" Eden stood shakily, her hands trembling even in restraints. "Your Honor, I didn't know what I was signing. Parker told me they were legitimate investment documents. I was just helping with paperwork. I'm 6 weeks pregnant, and I'm terrified." Judge Morrison's expression softened almost imperceptibly, the only acknowledgement that pregnancy complicated everything. "Ms. Morgan, ignorance of the law is not a defense, but your cooperation with investigators will be noted." She returned her attention to both defendants. "Given the severity of charges, evidence of flight risk, and potential for obstruction, bail is denied for Mr. Walsh. Ms. Morgan, considering your pregnancy and lesser role in the conspiracy, I'm setting bail at $250,000 with electronic monitoring and travel restrictions." Parker's face went white, then red, his carefully constructed composure finally shattering. "This is bullshit. My wife set me up because I had an affair. She's vindictive and mentally unstable. Check her psychological history. She's been seeing a therapist for anxiety, probably depression. She fabricated evidence because she couldn't handle rejection." The courtroom fell silent at this outburst, every eye turning toward Parker as he continued his meltdown. "She's lying about everything. Those accounts were legitimate. The offshore holdings were legal tax planning. She's weaponizing the legal system because I fell in love with someone else." Judge Morrison's gavel cracked like a gunshot. "Mr. Walsh, one more outburst and you'll be held in contempt. Your personal grievances are not relevant to the criminal charges you face." She nodded to the bailiff. "Remand both defendants to federal custody pending trial." As they were let out, Parker twisted to look directly at me, his expression promising retribution in whatever way he could still deliver it. Eden just cried, her shoulders shaking with sobs that echoed in the silent courtroom. I felt nothing watching them go. No satisfaction, no guilt, just a cold certainty that justice was finally moving forward with mechanical inevitability. Outside the courthouse, Marks caught up with me before I could reach my car. "Mrs. Walsh, you should know that Parker's attorney has already filed motions challenging the evidence. They're arguing marital privilege and claiming you had improper access to his business records." I'd been expecting this. I never accessed protected communications. Everything I documented came from joint accounts, shared computers, and public records. My forensic accountant verified the legality of every source. Marks nodded with satisfaction. That's what we told them. But expect the defense to get creative. They'll try to paint you as a scorned wife, fabricating evidence for revenge. Character assassination is Caldwell's specialty. "Let them try," I replied evenly. I documented 18 months of systematic fraud with independent verification. My motivations don't change the math. The next 3 months blurred into a nightmare of legal proceedings, media scrutiny, and social exile. Parker's arrest made national news. Local investment advisor charged in multi-million-dollar fraud and money laundering scheme. Photos of our house cordoned off with FBI tape appeared on evening broadcasts. My name was dragged through articles and social media as the vindictive wife who destroyed her husband over infidelity. My parents stopped speaking to me entirely, siding with Eden despite the evidence. My mother left voicemail messages calling me heartless and cruel for persecuting my pregnant sister. Extended family members sent emails ranging from disappointed to outright hostile, accusing me of tearing apart the family over pride. Friends Parker and I had made together chose sides, and most chose his, believing his narrative that I'd fabricated evidence in a jealous rage. Only Willow remained steadfast, along with a small circle of colleagues who knew my professional reputation and couldn't reconcile it with claims I'd manufactured documents. The social isolation was suffocating, but I'd prepared for it. I'd known choosing justice would cost me relationships built on comfortable lies. What I hadn't prepared for was the investigative scrutiny that extended to my own life. Federal auditors examined every account I'd touched, every transaction I'd made, looking for evidence I'd personally benefited from Parker's crimes. My employer launched an internal review of my work, concerned about potential conflicts of interest. For 2 months, I lived under suspicion from all sides, waiting for someone to find evidence I'd been complicit. The exoneration came in March, a formal letter from the U.S. Attorney's office stating I'd been thoroughly investigated and cleared of any wrongdoing or knowledge of criminal activities prior to October 2024. My employer followed with reinstatement of full duties and a formal apology for the investigation. But the damage to my reputation lingered. Whispers that followed me through professional conferences and social gatherings. Meanwhile, Parker's defense team filed motion after motion, trying to suppress evidence, dismiss charges, delay trial. They deposed me for 7 hours, Caldwell asking invasive questions about my mental health, my marriage, my motivations for reporting Parker. I answered every question with clinical precision, refusing to be baited into emotional responses that could be used against me. Eden's situation was more complex. Her public defender negotiated a plea deal, testimony against Parker in exchange for reduced charges. She'd served 2 years in a minimum security facility, eligible for maternity release and early parole given her pregnancy and cooperation. My sister accepted the deal in April, her allocution in court a performance of remorse that might have moved me if I hadn't spent 26 years watching her manipulate sympathy from every authority figure she encountered. "I made terrible choices," she told the judge, tears streaming down her face. "I betrayed my sister. I let myself be used by Parker. I didn't ask the questions I should have asked. I'm so sorry for the hurt I've caused." Judge Morrison accepted the plea with visible reservation. "Ms. Morgan, you will serve 24 months in federal custody, with 18 months suspended pending good behavior. You'll be eligible for maternity release when your pregnancy reaches 3rd trimester, and you'll complete your sentence on house arrest with electronic monitoring." Eden's sentencing meant she'd testify against Parker at trial, her cooperation a devastating blow to his defense strategy. Caldwell tried to undermine her credibility by highlighting the affair and pregnancy, but Marks countered with financial records that proved Eden's testimony about document signing and transaction processing. The trial began in May, almost 5 months after Parker's arrest. I sat in the public gallery every day, watching prosecutors dismantle the life he'd built with methodical precision. Client after client testified about lost savings, delayed retirements, foreclosed homes. A grandmother described having to move in with her daughter after losing her husband's pension to Parker's fraud. A couple in their 60s explained they'd postponed medical treatments they couldn't afford after their retirement account disappeared. Parker watched these testimonies with increasing desperation, his expensive suit unable to disguise the toll prison and legal stress had taken. He'd lost weight, his face gaunt and shadowed, his hands occasionally trembling when prosecutors displayed evidence of his crimes. Eden testified on day 4, her pregnancy now visible at 16 weeks, her voice shaking as she described how Parker had gradually involved her in processing transactions she'd believed were legitimate. "He said we were helping families build wealth," she said, not meeting Parker's eyes. "He said it was complicated financial planning that I didn't need to understand fully. I trusted him because my sister trusted him." Caldwell tried to break her on cross-examination, suggesting she'd known exactly what she was doing and was now lying to reduce her own sentence. "Isn't it true, Ms. Morgan, that you understood these were fraudulent accounts? That you profited from this scheme?" Eden's voice firmed fractionally. "I received a salary for administrative work. I didn't receive commissions or profit sharing. And no, I didn't understand it was fraud until my sister confronted me in January." "But you were having an affair with Mr. Walsh," Caldwell pressed. "Conspiring with him in your sister's house, plotting how to tell her about your pregnancy. That doesn't sound like an innocent administrative assistant being deceived." "The affair was wrong," Eden admitted, finally looking at me across the courtroom. "I betrayed my sister in the worst possible way. But that doesn't mean I understood the business was fraudulent. Parker lied to me about a lot of things. That was just one more lie." Her testimony, combined with the forensic accounting evidence I'd compiled, created an overwhelming narrative of systematic fraud. The prosecution's case was so strong that Caldwell barely attempted a defense, instead focusing on arguing for reduced sentencing based on Parker's lack of criminal history and psychological evaluation, suggesting narcissistic personality disorder. On day 7, both sides rested. The jury deliberated for 90 minutes before returning with guilty verdicts on all 23 counts. Parker's face crumbled as the foreman read each guilty in succession, the reality finally penetrating his carefully constructed denial. Judge Morrison scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later, allowing time for pre-sentence investigations and victim impact statements. Those 2 weeks felt like the longest of my life, a liminal space between the destruction of my old life and whatever came next. I drafted my victim impact statement with Marx's guidance, trying to articulate the devastation Parker had caused without seeming vindictive or emotionally unstable. The sentencing hearing drew media attention I'd been trying to avoid, cameras and reporters crowding the courthouse steps. I entered through a back entrance arranged by Marx, avoiding the spotlight while knowing I couldn't escape it forever. Parker stood before Judge Morrison in prison blues, his expensive suits traded for regulation clothing that made him look ordinary, reduced, just another criminal waiting to learn his fate. Marx spoke first, outlining the scope of his crimes and requesting maximum sentencing. "Your Honor, Mr. Walsh defrauded 47 families of over $2 million. He laundered money for drug trafficking organizations. He stole from his own family, including his wife's grandmother's trust fund. He threatened witnesses and attempted to flee the country. This was not a crime of opportunity or desperation. It was calculated exploitation of trust over 2 years. The government requests the maximum sentence of 20 years. Caldwell countered with a plea for mercy based on Parker's psychological evaluation and lack of criminal history. "Your Honor, Mr. Walsh suffers from narcissistic personality disorder that impaired his judgment. He has expressed remorse for his actions. His wife's betrayal, reporting him to authorities, has resulted in the loss of his business, his marriage, his reputation. He has already been significantly punished." Judge Morrison's expression suggested she found this argument unpersuasive. "Mr. Caldwell, your client's mental health diagnosis does not absolve him of responsibility for systematic fraud, and characterizing his wife's cooperation with federal investigators as betrayal demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of criminal accountability." She turned to me. "Mrs. Walsh, you submitted a victim impact statement. Would you like to read it aloud?" I stood on shaking legs, approaching the podium with my statement trembling in my hands. Your Honor, Parker Walsh didn't just steal money. He stole futures, retirements, security, hope. The grandmother whose testimony you heard last week will never recover what she lost. The couple postponing medical treatment may suffer permanent health consequences because they can't afford care. Parker knew these were real people with real lives, and he didn't care. My voice steadied as I continued. He also stole from my grandmother, a woman who worked her entire life to leave something for her granddaughters. He used that money to fund his fraud and his lies. When I discovered what he'd done, he threatened me. He tried to flee the country. He showed no remorse until he was caught, and even then only for being caught, not for the harm he caused. I looked directly at Parker for the first time since the trial began. I loved him. I trusted him. I built a life with him. He exploited that trust to steal from my family while betraying me with my sister. That's not a mental health disorder, Your Honor. That's moral bankruptcy. I returned to my seat, my hands still trembling but my conscience clear. I'd said what needed saying without vindictiveness, stating facts that spoke for themselves. Judge Morrison reviewed documents before her with the careful attention of someone weighing lives in the balance. Mr. Walsh, I have reviewed your pre-sentence report, psychological evaluations, and victim impact statements. I have considered the scope of your crimes, the sophistication of your fraud, and the harm you've caused. She paused, letting weight settle over the courtroom. Your actions destroyed families' financial security. You laundered money for organizations trafficking in human misery. You betrayed your wife and conspired with her sister. You threatened witnesses and attempted to flee. These are not the actions of someone with impaired judgment. They are the actions of someone who believed rules didn't apply to him. Parker's attorney stood quickly. Your Honor, if I may address— You may not, Morrison cut him off firmly. I've heard enough from defense counsel. She returned her attention to Parker. The court sentences you to 17 years in federal prison, to be served in a medium security facility. Upon release, you will serve 3 years of supervised release with requirements for mental health treatment and financial counseling. You are ordered to pay full restitution to all identified victims, which the court calculates at $2.4 million, including accrued interest and penalties. Parker's knees buckled, his attorney catching him as the reality of 17 years crashed over him. He'd be 54 when released, his business destroyed, his reputation ruined, his life effectively over. The bailiff moved forward to restrain him, but Parker twisted back toward me one final time. This is your fault, he screamed, spit flying with the force of his rage. You destroyed everything because you couldn't handle being second choice. I hope you're happy, you vindictive bitch. I hope— The bailiff's hand clamped over Parker's mouth, cutting off whatever else he planned to say. As they dragged him from the courtroom, his eyes promised retribution he had no power to deliver. Judge Morrison's gavel cracked sharply. This court is adjourned. I sat motionless as the courtroom emptied, feeling Willow's hand find mine in silent support. Outside, Marks approached with an expression that might have been approval. Justice was served today, Mrs. Walsh. 17 years is substantial for white-collar crime. You should be proud of what you accomplished. Proud. The word felt hollow. I'd destroyed my marriage, alienated my family, sent my sister to prison, and consigned my husband to 17 years of incarceration. Justice had been served, but it tasted like ashes. 3 months after Parker's sentencing, I stood in the empty shell of the house we'd shared, watching movers load the last of my possessions into a truck. The federal government had seized the property for asset forfeiture, selling it to partially reimburse Parker's victims. Everything inside, the furniture we'd carefully selected, the artwork we'd collected, the appliances we'd upgraded, would be auctioned off, our life together reduced to lot numbers and catalog descriptions. I kept only what was undeniably mine: clothing, personal documents, my grandmother's jewelry that Parker hadn't managed to steal, and a single photograph of Eden and me as children, before betrayal had carved an unbridgeable chasm between us. The movers left around noon, leaving me alone in rooms that echoed with the ghosts of a life I'd systematically destroyed to achieve justice. My phone buzzed with an email from the Victim Compensation Fund administrator. Final distribution approved. Your grandmother's trust fund restitution has been processed. Please expect transfer within 5 to 7 business days. $400,000 returning to me from the wreckage of Parker's fraud. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it just felt like recovering pieces of something that could never be whole again. I locked the front door for the last time, leaving the keys in the lockbox for the federal marshal handling the sale. My new apartment, a modest one-bedroom in a different neighborhood, waited across town, furnished with second-hand pieces and stripped of any connection to my previous life. It was smaller, simpler, and entirely mine in ways the house had never been. Willow helped me unpack that evening, arranging kitchen supplies and hanging curtains while carefully not mentioning how different this space was from my former home. Fresh start, she said finally, pouring wine into mismatched glasses I'd bought at a thrift store. Clean slate. Scorched earth, I corrected, clinking my glass against hers. Nothing survived the fire except me. We drank in comfortable silence, the kind of quiet that comes from friendship tested by crisis and emerging stronger. My phone showed a voicemail from my mother, the first communication in 4 months. I almost deleted it without listening, but curiosity won. Sienna, it's your mother. The message began stiffly. Eden gave birth last week, a girl, 7 pounds, healthy. She named her Lily. My sister's voice continued in the background, muffled but audible. She wanted you to know, even though you probably don't care. I deleted the voicemail without finishing it, my hands trembling with emotions I couldn't name. My niece, Eden's daughter, Parker's child, a baby born into a situation created by her parents' crimes and my determination to expose them. Willow watched me carefully. You okay? I don't know what I am, I admitted. I have a niece I'll probably never meet. My sister is serving time in federal prison. My parents won't speak to me except to announce births like I'm a distant acquaintance. And Parker is in a medium-security prison planning revenge he can't execute for 17 years. But you're free, Willow pointed out. You're not married to a criminal. You're not complicit in fraud. You're not living a lie anymore. She was right, but freedom felt lonelier than I'd expected. The justice I'd fought for had cost me family, friends, community. Everyone who'd built their understanding of me on the foundation of my marriage to Parker. Work became my refuge, the one place where competence and expertise mattered more than complicated personal history. My employer had fully reinstated me after the federal investigation cleared me, even offering a modest promotion to senior auditor as acknowledgement of my forensic skills. I threw myself into projects with singular focus, finding comfort in numbers that behaved predictably and rules that applied uniformly. 6 months after Parker's sentencing, I received a letter forwarded from my old address. Prison mail, I recognized immediately, addressed in Eden's handwriting. I almost threw it away unopened, but something, curiosity, masochism, or maybe just exhaustion, made me break the seal. Sienna, the letter began, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect you to respond, but I need you to know some things because I'm finally understanding what I did to you, to us, to our family. I've been in therapy here, mandatory for inmates, but I actually participate. My therapist says I have codependency issues stemming from always being compared to you growing up. You were the responsible one, the achiever, the daughter mom and dad were proud of. I was the screw-up, the disappointment, the one who needed constant rescue. When Parker paid attention to me, told me I was special, made me feel valued for something other than being your less successful sister, I grabbed onto that validation like a drowning person grabs a lifeline. I'm not excusing what I did. Sleeping with your husband was betrayal. Helping him steal from our grandmother was criminal. Letting him manipulate me into processing fraudulent transactions was stupid and illegal. But I'm trying to understand why I made those choices so I don't repeat them. Lily is beautiful. She has your eyes. Did you know that? Brown with gold flecks, exactly like yours. Mom brings her to visit twice a month. They're taking care of her while I serve my time. She'll be 18 months old when I'm released. I'll have missed her first steps, her first words, her first birthday. That's my punishment, along with the legal one. Parker writes me sometimes. Angry letters blaming you for everything. claiming he was set up, insisting that if I'd just kept my mouth shut during testimony, we'd both be free. I don't respond anymore. I finally see him for what he is, a manipulator who used both of us for his own purposes. You saw it first. You were smart enough to investigate, brave enough to report him, strong enough to withstand losing everything to do the right thing. I hate that I wasn't that person. I hate that I chose him over you. Crime over family, comfortable lies over difficult truth. I'm not asking for forgiveness or reconciliation. I'm just asking you to know that I understand now. You didn't destroy our family. Parker did. I helped. And when you had the courage to expose that truth, the rest of us attacked you for refusing to live in our shared delusion. That was cowardice on our part, not cruelty on yours. When I'm released, I'll be moving to Oregon to work for a nonprofit mom found that helps formerly incarcerated women rebuild their lives. I won't contact you unless you want me to. I won't bring Lily around to complicate your life. I just wanted you to know that your sister, the real Eden underneath all the codependency and manipulation and bad choices, is sorry. And she's proud of you for having integrity. She didn't. Take care of yourself, Lauren. You deserve happiness after everything you endured. Eden. I read the letter 3 times, looking for manipulation or hidden agenda, and finding only exhaustion and dawning self-awareness. My sister was finally growing up in federal prison, learning lessons she should have absorbed decades earlier. It was too late to repair our relationship, too late to recover what she'd destroyed, but maybe not too late for her to become someone worth knowing in some distant future. I filed the letter in a folder with other documents from the case, not ready to respond, but not quite ready to discard either. Some wounds needed time to scar over before they could be examined without bleeding fresh. 8 months post-sentencing, the Victim Compensation Fund contacted me about additional restitution from liquidated assets. Parker's offshore accounts, once discovered and frozen, had been seized and distributed to victims. My portion, another $60,000 representing my share of my grandmother's stolen trust plus penalties, appeared in my account with bureaucratic efficiency. I donated half to a financial literacy nonprofit helping families avoid investment fraud. The rest went into savings, insurance against future crises I hoped wouldn't come but knew better than to discount. My life settled into new rhythms, work, therapy, occasional dinners with Willow and the small circle of friends who'd stood by me. I dated cautiously, learning to recognize red flags I'd missed with Parker. Most connections fizzled after a few dates when I explained why my last marriage ended. Nobody wanted the baggage of, my ex-husband is in federal prison for fraud and money laundering, and yes, I'm the one who reported him. Then I met James. He was a forensic accountant at a different firm, someone who understood the kind of financial detective work I'd done to uncover Parker's fraud. We met at a professional conference where I was presenting on identifying Ponzi scheme indicators. His first question after my presentation was, "How did you live with someone for 6 years and not see the signs sooner?" I appreciated his directness. I saw what I was conditioned to see, a successful husband building a career. I explained the warning signs I'd documented in my presentation. He nodded thoughtfully. "And when you finally saw clearly?" I documented everything and turned him in to federal authorities. His smile held understanding rather than judgment. That took courage. Most people would have looked away. We dated carefully for 3 months before I told him the full story. Parker, Eden, the pregnancy, the trial, the family estrangement. James listened without interruption, his expression thoughtful rather than shocked. When I finished, he said simply, "You chose accountability over comfort." That's rare. It was the first time someone had validated my choices without qualifications or caveats. We moved slowly, building trust through consistency and transparency. He met Willow and passed her intensive vetting. I met his family and found acceptance without judgment. A year after Parker's sentencing, James and I moved in together. Not to his place or mine, but to a new apartment we chose together. Neutral territory unmarked by past betrayals. My parents remained distant, occasional emails updating me on Eden's progress in prison and Lily's development. They'd chosen their allegiance, prioritizing Eden's need for family support over acknowledging the crimes she'd committed. I understood their choice even as it hurt. It was easier to blame me for breaking the family than to accept that Eden and Parker had shattered it long before I'd reported their crimes. On the second anniversary of New Year's Eve, the night I'd overheard the conversation that detonated my life, I stood in my kitchen making dinner with James, the radio playing softly in the background. My phone rang with an unknown number from Oregon. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. Sienna? Eden's voice, tentative and uncertain. I'm out. I completed my sentence. Congratulations, I said, the word automatic and hollow. Thank you for the letter you sent. I should have responded. You didn't need to, she replied quickly. I didn't write it expecting anything. I just wanted you to know I understand now what I did. We were silent for a long moment, the weight of everything unsaid pressing through the phone line. How's Lily? I asked finally. Beautiful. Exhausting. Everything they say about toddlers is true. Her voice warmed, talking about her daughter. She looks like you, actually. More than me. Eden sent me a letter saying she had my eyes. She does, and your stubborn determination to figure things out. She's smart, Lauren. Really smart. I stirred sauce on the stove, watching James set the table, this man who knew my whole story and loved me anyway. I'm glad you're doing well, that you have Lily, that you're building a life. Are we? Eden hesitated. Is there any chance we could try? Not to go back to how things were, but maybe to build something new? I thought about the sister I'd loved, the betrayal that had destroyed us, the 2 years of legal proceedings and social exile that had followed. Could we ever recover what she'd broken? Did I even want to try? I don't know, I admitted finally. Maybe someday. But not now. I'm still healing from everything that happened. I understand, Eden said quietly. If you ever want to meet Lily or just talk, I'm here. No pressure, just possibility. We ended the call with tentative goodbyes. The door to reconciliation cracked open fractionally, but not swung wide. Healing would take time, years probably, and might never result in the sisterhood we'd once shared. But possibility was more than I'd had before. James pulled me into a hug when I hung up. How do you feel? Lighter, I realized. She apologized without expecting anything. She's building a life focused on her daughter rather than her mistakes. That's growth. Does it change anything for you? Not yet, maybe not ever, but knowing she understands what she did, that she's working to be better, it closes a chapter I needed closed. We ate dinner together, talking about weekend plans and work projects, the comfortable domesticity of a relationship built on honesty rather than deception. For the first time since New Year's Eve 2 years ago, I felt something close to peace. Parker's first parole hearing took place on a Monday in August, 15 years into his 17-year sentence. I'd received notification months earlier, along with an invitation to submit a statement about whether I believed he should be released early. I spent a week drafting my response, trying to balance honesty with fairness, justice with mercy. In the end, I wrote 3 paragraphs stating facts. Parker had shown no genuine remorse during trial or in subsequent communications. He continued to blame others for his crimes. While he'd completed mandatory programming in prison, his letters to Eden, which she'd forwarded to me, suggested manipulation rather than reformation. I recommended he serve his full sentence. The parole board agreed. Parker would remain incarcerated until 2042, when he'd be 54 and I'd be 47. By then, Lily would be 17, Eden would be 44, and the life we'd all shared before his crimes would be ancient history. I received the decision notification via email and closed my laptop feeling nothing. Not satisfaction, not guilt, just exhausted acceptance that justice was slow and thorough and ultimately delivered consequences exactly as earned. James found me staring at the lake view from our condo balcony that evening. We'd purchased the place 6 months ago, the down payment funded by careful savings and my restored trust fund. It was modest by Parker's standards, but luxurious by mine. A space built on honest work rather than stolen money. Thinking about the hearing? He asked, handing me wine. Thinking about how different life is now. 5 years ago, I was married to a criminal I didn't recognize, living in a house bought with fraud money, surrounded by people who believed comfortable lies. Now I'm here with you, doing work I'm proud of, living honestly. Everything I thought I wanted turned out to be built on rotting foundations. James settled beside me, his shoulder warm against mine. Do you regret reporting him? I considered the question honestly. I regret what I lost. Family connections, naive trust, the sister I thought Eden was. But I don't regret choosing accountability over complicity. If I'd stayed silent, I'd be someone I couldn't respect. That's what I love about you, he said simply. You choose integrity even when it costs everything. We sat in comfortable silence, watching sunset paint the lake in shades of amber and rose. My phone buzzed with a text from Eden. I heard about Parker's parole denial. How are you holding up? I'd been surprised by Eden's persistence in maintaining contact over the past 3 years. She sent occasional updates about Lily, asked permission before sharing anything about me with our parents, and respected my boundaries about when and how we communicated. Our relationship would never be what it was, but it had evolved into something cautious and carefully maintained. Two people who shared DNA and trauma learning to coexist in each other's orbits. I'm fine, I texted back. Justice was served. He earns his full sentence. Agreed. Lily's asking about you again, by the way. She saw a photo at Mom's house and wanted to know who the woman with my eyes was. My niece. Almost 5 years old now, growing up in Oregon with a mother who'd served time for helping defraud families and a father in federal prison. What would Eden tell her about why her family was fractured? How would she explain that Aunt Lauren existed but wasn't part of their lives? What did you tell her? I typed. That you're my sister who I hurt badly and you needed space to heal. That maybe someday we'd all meet, but it's my job to respect your needs, not push for what I want. She seemed to accept that. I showed the exchange to James. She's trying. Eden's really trying to be better. Does that change anything for you? Maybe. Eventually. But not yet. I'm not ready to be someone's aunt when I'm still processing being her betrayed sister. He nodded, understanding. No rush. Healing happens on your schedule, not anyone else's. 6 months later, I received an unexpected email from Special Agent Hayes, the FBI agent who'd led the investigation into Parker's crimes. Mrs. Walsh, it began formally. I'm reaching out to inform you that Parker Walsh has been involved in an incident at the correctional facility where he's housed. He attempted to orchestrate fraud from prison, using contraband phones to contact former business associates and victims. His sentence will likely be extended for this violation. The email continued with details about Parker's scheme. He'd tried to convince 3 former clients that he had hidden assets he could return to them if they sent money for legal fees to access offshore accounts. 2 had refused and reported him immediately. 1 had sent $5,000 before realizing it was another con. Thought you'd want to know, Hayes concluded. Some criminals never learn. At least this time he was caught before causing significant damage. I replied with thanks and forwarded the email to Eden. Her response came quickly. He never changes. Still a con man even after 15 years in prison. Thank God you got us all away from him when you did. It was the first time Eden had explicitly acknowledged that my actions had saved her from continuing down Parker's path. If I'd stayed silent, she might have spent years complicit in his schemes until they both got caught in something even worse. By exposing him when I did, I'd limited her legal exposure and given her a chance to rebuild. James found me staring at the email exchange. You okay? I'm realizing something, I said slowly. I've been so focused on what reporting Parker cost me, family, friends, my old life, that I haven't acknowledged what it saved. If I'd stayed silent, I'd still be married to him. Eden would still be entangled in his schemes. More families would have lost their savings. The money laundering would have escalated. Eventually, it would have collapsed in ways that destroyed even more people. You chose the hard right over the easy wrong, James observed. That's heroism, even if it doesn't feel heroic. It felt like survival, I admitted. It felt like having no choice but to burn down everything to stop the infection from spreading. Sometimes that's what heroism looks like. Not grand gestures, but ordinary people making impossible choices because they're the only moral option. I thought about that as I prepared for bed that night. The past 5 years had been defined by loss and reconstruction. Losing family, building new relationships, losing naivety, gaining discernment, losing comfortable illusions, gaining uncomfortable truth. If I could go back to New Year's Eve and choose differently, would I? The answer was no. Knowing everything that would follow, the investigations, the trial, the estrangement, the social exile, I'd still overhear that conversation in the laundry room and decide to document Parker's crimes. Because the alternative was complicity, and I couldn't live as someone who enabled fraud and betrayal through willful ignorance. 7 years after New Year's Eve, I stood in a courtroom again, not as a witness or victim, but as an observer. Parker was being sentenced for his prison fraud attempt, adding 3 years to his original sentence. He'd be 57 at release now, his entire middle age consumed by incarceration. He looked older than his 40 years, prison having weathered him into someone unrecognizable from the charismatic man I'd married. His hair was completely gray, his face lined and hardened, his eyes carrying the flat affect of someone who'd learned to suppress emotion to survive. When the judge asked if he had anything to say before sentencing, Parker stood and surprised me. "I want to apologize to my former wife, Lauren. I blamed her for years for my incarceration, told myself she was vindictive and cruel. But therapy here has helped me understand that she did what was right. I committed crimes. She reported them. That's not betrayal. That's accountability." He paused, seeming to struggle with words. "I destroyed lives with my fraud. I hurt families. I stole from people who trusted me. I betrayed my wife and manipulated her sister. None of that is Lauren's fault. It's mine. I earned every year of this sentence, and I'm sorry it took me this long to understand that." The apology was so unexpected that I sat frozen, unable to process whether it was genuine or just another manipulation. Parker had always been skilled at saying what people needed to hear. Judge Morrison sentenced him to the additional 3 years, making clear that Parker's apology, while noted, didn't erase his attempt to defraud victims from prison. As they led him away, Parker looked directly at me for the first time in 7 years. His expression held no anger or hatred, just exhausted resignation. Outside the courtroom, I sat in my car for 20 minutes, processing what had happened. James had offered to come, but I'd wanted to face this alone, to close this chapter without support as proof I'd healed enough to stand independently. Finally, I pulled out my phone and called Eden. "Parker apologized," I said when she answered. "In court. He said I did what was right by reporting him." Eden was quiet for a long moment. "Do you believe him?" "I don't know. Maybe. He's had 7 years to think about his choices. Maybe he's finally developed actual self-awareness, or maybe he's just learned what the parole board wants to hear." "Either way," Eden said slowly, "he acknowledged that you weren't the villain in this story. That matters, even if his sincerity is questionable." We talked for a while about healing and forgiveness and whether either was possible when betrayal ran so deep. Eden shared updates about Lily, now 7, and asking increasingly complex questions about why her father was in prison and her aunt was absent. "I tell her the truth in age-appropriate terms," Eden explained, "that her father made bad choices and broke laws, that Aunt Lauren did the brave thing by reporting him, even though it was hard and people got angry at her for it." "How does she respond to that?" "She says she wants to be like you when she grows up. Someone who does hard right things instead of easy wrong things." The words hit me unexpectedly hard, tears stinging my eyes. My niece, who I'd never met, who'd grown up without me because of circumstances created by her parents' crimes, and my need for justice, saw me as someone to emulate rather than someone who destroyed her family. "Maybe I'm ready," I said suddenly. "Maybe I'm ready to meet her, and you. Not to pretend the past didn't happen, or that we're back to how things were, but to see if we can build something new from what survived." Eden's sharp inhale was audible. "Really? You're sure?" "No pressure, Lauren. I meant what I said about respecting your timeline." "I'm sure. It's been 7 years. Parker's apologized, even if I'm skeptical. You've rebuilt your life and shown consistent change. I've healed enough to stop bleeding at the thought of family connections. Maybe it's time." We scheduled a meeting for the following month, neutral territory at a park halfway between Oregon and where I lived now. I'd meet my niece for the first time, reconnect with my sister in person after years of carefully managed distance, and see if reconciliation was possible when both parties had genuinely changed. The night before the meeting, I couldn't sleep. James held me as I worked through anxiety and uncertainty. What if this is a mistake? What if seeing them just reopens wounds that finally scarred over? Then you'll deal with it, he said simply. You've survived worse than an awkward reunion. And if it doesn't work out, you can choose distance again. But you'll never know unless you try. He was right. The next morning, I drove 3 hours to a park I'd never visited, dressed carefully in clothes that projected confidence without arrogance. Eden arrived 15 minutes early with a little girl whose eyes were indeed exactly like mine, brown with gold flecks that caught sunlight. Lily studied me gravely before announcing, "You're the brave aunt who did hard, right things." Children's brutal honesty, cutting through years of complexity to deliver simple truth. "I'm Aunt Lauren," I confirmed, kneeling to her level. "And you must be Lily. Your mom says you're really smart." "I am," Lily agreed without false modesty. "Mommy says you caught bad guys by being smart with numbers. I'm good at numbers too. Maybe I'll catch bad guys someday." Over the next 2 hours, we walked through the park and talked, Eden and I cautiously rebuilding connection while Lily explored playground equipment with the fearless joy of childhood. We didn't discuss Parker or the trial or the years of estrangement in detail. Instead, we talked about Lily's school, Eden's job at the nonprofit helping formerly incarcerated women, my work and relationship with James. As we prepared to leave, Eden pulled me aside while Lily chased ducks near the pond. "Thank you for giving us this chance. I know I don't deserve it." "You earned it," I corrected, through years of respecting boundaries, consistent change, and genuine accountability. The Eden who betrayed me 7 years ago wouldn't have been capable of this meeting. You're different now. She nodded, tears threatening. "I'll never stop being sorry for what I did, but I'm trying to be someone Lily can be proud of, someone who breaks cycles instead of perpetuating them." We hugged awkwardly, two sisters learning to navigate a relationship reconstructed from rubble. It wasn't what we'd had before, and it would never be, but it was something, fragile and tentative, but real. On the drive home, I called James. "How did it go?" "Better than expected. Lily is remarkable, smart and direct and oddly wise for 7. Eden has genuinely changed, or she's maintained a performance for 7 years, which seems unlikely. I think we can build something. Slowly, with clear boundaries, but something." "I'm proud of you," he said simply, "for having the courage to try." That evening, I sat on our balcony watching sunset, paint the lake gold and orange, reflecting on the journey from New Year's Eve 7 years ago to today. I'd lost so much. My marriage, my family as I'd known it, my comfortable illusions, my naive trust. But I'd gained more. Self-respect, authentic relationships, professional credibility, the knowledge that I could survive devastating betrayal and choose integrity anyway. Parker would spend another 13 years in prison, his life consumed by consequences he'd earned through systematic fraud and manipulation. Eden had rebuilt, learning from her mistakes, and raising a daughter who valued doing hard right things. My parents remained distant, still unable to fully acknowledge the complexity of what had happened. And me? I was building a life defined by honesty, surrounded by people who valued authenticity over performance. Some nights I still thought about that New Year's Eve party, the champagne I'd gone to fetch, the conversation I'd overheard that detonated everything. If I'd returned to the party without overhearing, if I'd never learned about the fraud, would I still be married to Parker? Living in that house built on stolen money? Complicit through ignorance and crimes that destroyed families? The answer was yes, and that alternate version of myself seemed like a stranger. Someone sleepwalking through life, accepting surface appearances, never asking hard questions because the answers might be uncomfortable. I preferred this version, the woman who'd chosen truth over comfort, justice over complicity, accountability over easy silence. It had cost everything I thought I wanted, but it had delivered something more valuable, the ability to look in the mirror and recognize someone I could respect. My phone buzzed with a text from Lily, sent through Eden's phone. "Thank you for being my brave aunt. I love you even though we just met." Children's brutal honesty again, offering love without conditions or history, just pure connection. I texted back, "I love you too, Lily, and I'm proud of how smart and kind you are. Can't wait to see you again." Because that was the gift of reconstruction after devastation. You got to choose what you rebuilt, who you included, what values would define the new structure. I'd chosen authenticity, accountability, and carefully granted trust. I'd chosen James, who valued my integrity. I'd chosen Willow, who'd stood beside me through the worst. I'd chosen cautious reconciliation with Eden, because she'd earned it through consistent change. And I'd chosen to let Lily into my life, because she deserved an aunt who modeled integrity rather than complicity. The scorched earth I'd left behind had seemed barren for years. But slowly, carefully, life had begun growing again. Different from before, marked by fire, but real and honest and mine. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything that mattered.